Hey everyone, so I wanted to make these videos as a add-on to the Tegrity collection of videos that I created with the PowerPoint. These are going to just be slightly different. I'm going to basically be walking through all of the chapter and all the parts of the chapter, giving you hints and tricks on how to study the material, as well as doing some explanation, some deeper explanation of those really in-depth physiological procedures, which really, this chapter is really straightforward. Chapter 19 is it's probably the easiest chapter of the semester. So you should just kind of take it with baby steps, but don't underestimate it. You should put in the time to study it, starting from day one on Monday. The chapter starts with the functions of blood, straight up, easy, so you should understand how the blood functions to maintain homeostasis, how the blood functions to maintain body temperature, transport, clot, etc. Then we get into the composition of blood, very straightforward, plasma formed elements and what all those things are. Again, straight up memorization. The different types of blood components, the components of the plasma, that's on that chart on page 640. You should know all of those, straight memorization. Parts on page 641, all of the different red and white blood cells. Yep, you got to know those too. So then we get into the little family tree that's on page 642. It all starts with the stem cell. The stem cell differentiates into the myeloid stem cell or the lymphoid stem cell, and that will kind of decide the fate. That's all done by hormones. So a hormone comes and signals that new blood cells are needed and exactly which type of blood cell. So that's kind of the distinguishing factor there. And you see all of those steps that are listed in creating those new cells. Yep, you need to know all of them. You should understand the significance of them, especially for the red blood cell. The other cells are pretty straightforward. They go into one and then straight into the other. Platelets are slightly different. They become that megakaryocyte, which kind of explodes in these little bits and pieces called platelets. So otherwise, it's really straightforward right there on page 642. The next section starts off with all of the parts and the ins and outs of red blood cells. And of course, the function of red blood cells is to carry oxygen. They're very specialized in doing that. They have something like 280 million hemoglobin per red blood cell on them. Red blood cells have a biconcave texture. I always make this is my two plates next to each other. It's my red blood cell, and here's my little hemoglobin molecules. Of course, I didn't have time to make 280 million of them, sorry. But here's one of them. So if we look at this hemoglobin carefully, you see there's four yellow beads on there. Those 4 yellow beads represent the 4 heme units, and on each heme unit, there's one iron, which can hold 4 oxygen. So you're getting a lot of bang for your buck with this little hemoglobin molecule. So that's why red blood cells are so specialized and so important, because of that hemoglobin molecule. The red blood cells also contain an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase. That enzyme is going to come back to haunt us over and over again. It's super important to understand that enzyme and that little equation that's underneath of it on page 643, the reaction between carbon dioxide and water with carbonic anhydrase, creating the carbonic acid or the bicarbonate ion. It's an acid-base reaction. It's very important in the buffer system of our blood. So anyways, 644 goes on to show you the actual picture of the hemoglobin molecule and how that breaks down, and it introduces a few words to you. These words make you understand basic biology vocabulary. Oxyhemoglobin, well, that's just a hemoglobin that has oxygen on it. Deoxyhemoglobin is one without it. It's that straightforward. You also have carbaminohemoglobin. That is a hemoglobin that has carbon dioxide on it. So carbon dioxide can bind to hemoglobin as well, or be carried in the hemoglobin as well. What else? The other parts that are related to red blood cells have to do with the red blood cell life cycle, how they're made and how they're filtered out. Red blood cells only live for about 120 days in our bodies, so we have to have a really good recycling plant, and that's what our spleen is there for. So the red blood cells, and this is mostly diagrammed on page 47, it's actually showing you how the hemoglobin is broken down, recycled, and how those red blood cells are recycled as well. There's a little bit of interplay from other organs, not just the bone marrow playing a role here and the spleen. You have the liver functioning here, you have the kidneys functioning here, and the intestines as well to excrete some of the excess proteins. So what I would do with that chart, that flow chart there, that kind of diagram that's on page 647, I would recreate it and see if you can explain it yourself, right? It's all explained there in that little margin, the caption, but actually see if you can walk yourself through it as you draw it, and then as you go back and study your drawing. I think drawing and redrawing is a huge important study tool, especially for those of us that are very logical and science-minded, to kind of stretch our brains and work that other side of our brain a little bit more. So I strongly suggest doing that for this picture here. See if you can redraw it and walk yourself through those steps. And if you can't, then go back and reread the caption and memorize it that way. It's going to help you in the long run. So we'll stop here with this video, and I'll make another one in a minute.